Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name's Janos, and today I'm going to be reviewing Season 1 of The Midnight Gospel, a new animated series on Netflix from Adventure Time creator Pendleton Ward and comedian Duncan Trussell. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and if you're coming back, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Now with that out of the way, choose your avatar, strap into your multiverse simulator, and let's get started. The Midnight Gospel is probably one of the most unique and important animated shows I've seen in a long time. It combines beautiful animation with a seamless blend of scripted dialogue and clips from its co-creator's podcast, The Duncan Trussell Family Hour, where Duncan has deep, candid discussions with his guests about life, death, and everything in between. And it's the way these conversations are brought into The Midnight Gospel that make it so important. Most animated shows, or even shows in general, rarely touch on deep philosophical or metaphysical topics, instead choosing to focus on wacky adventures or silly jokes, and that's okay. We need that sort of stuff to get lost in every now and then. But in my opinion, we also need these very real, human, and sometimes uncomfortable conversations to expand our view of reality. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of shows with depth, and even other examples of animated podcasts. But in this video, I'm going to argue that The Midnight Gospel is wholly unique in its concept and execution, and explain why that matters. So, I already covered a lot of the show's premise in my recent trailer breakdown video, which you can check out here, if you'd like. But to give a brief description, The Midnight Gospel follows an amateur but enthusiastic spacecaster named Clancy, who recently moved to a strange place called the Chromatic Ribbon, where he bought a used multiverse simulator, a device capable of creating thousands of unique worlds where undiscovered technology can be harvested from. As we come to find out, Clancy has no idea how to properly operate this device, causing the worlds inside to rapidly deteriorate and die out. Despite this, Clancy decides to visit these dying worlds and interview the people living there. Clancy as a character is great, and Duncan Trussell does a fantastic job of bringing him to life. He's an extremely likable character, very easygoing and laid back, with a natural ability to sink into whatever conversations he's having with his guests. But he's not without his flaws. When we meet him, Clancy is very self-focused, and seems to be using his space cast as a means to run away from his past. What happened to cause this is unclear, as it's only hinted at throughout the season through brief and tumultuous phone calls with his sister. His egocentric behavior is perhaps best exemplified through his lack of basic maintenance of the multiverse simulator, even despite pleas of the simulator itself. This negligence doesn't just harm the device, as all the beings inside it suffer as a result as well. Even though this behavior is frustrating to watch, I think it's a mindset we can all relate to, being too self-focused to realize that we're in way over our heads. I think it's the contrast between these flaws and his naturally kind-hearted and introspective personality that make Clancy so likable as a character, and we're constantly reminded of these good qualities through his interviews with his guests. So let's talk about that. The series uses significantly more podcast clips than I was expecting, but that's not a bad thing. Every conversation is significant in its own way, and is used to explore ideas regarding life, death, how we relate to each other, and our general relationship with reality as a whole. What I found most unique, however, was the way these conversations were incorporated into the episodes. Let's look at another example of an animated podcast for a second, The Ricky Gervais Show. The dialogue in this series was taken entirely from podcast episodes, where Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant, and Carl Pilkington sat together and discussed whatever was on their mind. In this series, the animation corresponded directly with what the three were talking about. For example, if Carl is telling a story about going on vacation, that's what we're going to see on screen. This approach worked great for the series, and if you're a fan of Ricky Gervais, I recommend checking it out. But this is where The Midnight Gospel plants its flag as its own unique concept. The podcast clips it uses almost never directly correspond to what we're seeing. The characters move through various interesting worlds as chaotic and confusing events happen around them, while they just so happen to be having deep and stimulating conversations. This approach essentially creates two simultaneous storylines to pay attention to, and although this can be overwhelming at times, is incredibly captivating. In my opinion, this was a genius idea, as it allows us to listen to the various poignant ideas the characters discuss while experiencing the intriguing and unusual worlds they move through. And the way this was executed gives us the best of both worlds, rather than a confusing mix of the two. That said, because a majority of emphasis is placed on conversations, we don't have time to ruminate on these unique worlds, since everything moves so fast and is only explored for a single episode. This method of world building can be best understood as an iceberg approach, where what we're seeing is only the tip of the iceberg, but you can tell that so much more detail and thought exists beneath the surface. I feel like each world is so interesting that there could be multiple episodes dedicated to each one. I mean, how did the zombie apocalypse happen? What are these clown monsters and why are they obsessed with meat? Why is death living in Clancy's bag? It's not that these questions don't matter, they're just not the main focus. This approach creates a scenario where we have almost too much going on to take in, but in turn it allows us to get lost in the journey. We don't always need to see the whole iceberg. Sometimes the surface is beautiful enough on its own. And speaking of beautiful, let's take a second to appreciate the animation in this series. I think the animation studio Titmouse did an incredible job at bringing this idea to life, and in my opinion, maybe their best work yet. They were also the studio behind Metalocalypse and Big Mouth, to give a couple examples of their work. The Midnight Gospel's animation is unique and exceptionally well executed. This dissolve effect is used almost everywhere for shading and lighting, and conveys a sort of rough but genuine and surreal feeling. It's not an effect I've seen used often, and personally I think it looks fantastic. The character design is simple and uses colored outlines which give off a soft aesthetic that harmonizes nicely with the backgrounds. Even something as simple as this yellow outline around Clancy's skirt adds so much to his character, and taking it away creates a much more bland design. In terms of color, the show relies heavily on pinks, blues, and purples, which convey a sense of creativity and spirituality. It's definitely aesthetically reminiscent of Adventure Time, but feels more mature and developed. I'm very pleased with the direction Pendleton Ward took here, especially considering recent examples like Justin Roiland's Solar Opposites, which looks almost identical in style to Rick and Morty, or Lauren Bouchard's Central Park, which looks quite similar to Bob's Burgers. I don't think these shows look bad by any means, I just prefer seeing artists branch out, and we definitely got that with the Midnight Gospel. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's the use of podcast clips that make this series so important, as unlike a majority of other animated shows, the Midnight Gospel seeks to convey deep themes and explore ideas that often aren't acknowledged. It's hardly the first or only show with depth, as series like BoJack Horseman and Rick and Morty delve into mental illness and interesting concepts like simulated worlds and infinite universes, but I'm not aware of any other examples of such free-form discussions about life, death, and the metaphysical world in the medium of animation. It's a refreshing take, and an important reminder that animation can do more than just entertain. I would love to see more out-there ideas explored through animated series in the near future, and definitely would like to see more of the Midnight Gospel, although for now it's unclear whether we'll be getting a second season. Now, before I give my final thoughts, I'd like to talk briefly about my favorite episode of this season, which is by far the last one. This part of the video will contain spoilers, so if you'd like to avoid that, just skip ahead to this part of the video. Alright, all good? Cool. So yeah, my favorite episode is by far the last one, episode 8, Mouse of Silver. While all other episodes were about 25 minutes long, this one was much longer, almost 37 minutes, and for good reason. It was a gut punch of an episode with a very emotional and heartfelt conversation between Clancy and his mother, taken from an actual conversation between Duncan and his mother. This episode is where the lines between Clancy as a fictional character and the real-life Duncan Trussell start to blur, as the two talk about Duncan's birth, his life, and ultimately his mother's battle with terminal cancer and her impending death. It's an extremely personal conversation about something that virtually every single person will be faced with, the death of a loved one. And it's strange because as an audience we're used to seeing emotional scenes involving fictional characters, but the Midnight Gospel blurs that line, since these emotional moments are coming from both a real and fictional person. It's such a strange, interesting, and hard to articulate feeling that this gives off, primarily because it's something I haven't experienced before. For me, it's a new way of connecting to a character, and is a very special aspect of this series. And of course, there's plenty of metaphors for us to unpack, an example of which is towards the beginning of the episode when Clancy's mother dies. Clancy then quickly becomes pregnant and gives birth to an infant version of his mother, at which point the two continue their conversation. While at first this may seem ridiculous and strange, I took it as a metaphor of Clancy keeping his mother alive through his memory of her, the pain of childbirth being symbolic of the pain of grief over her loss, which ultimately gives way to new life in the form of her memory. It's stuff like this that makes me adore the Midnight Gospel as much as I do. In conclusion, it's my opinion that the Midnight Gospel showcases novel ideas and executes them extremely well. It's funny, silly, interesting, captivating, beautiful, dark, disturbing, and heartwarming in all the right places. Its animation is unique and very well done, and the way it blends the real world with the fictional one is something extremely special. It's important because it stands out as something both entertaining and thought-provoking in a way we don't often get to experience. I highly recommend this series to any adult that finds it interesting because, yeah, let me be clear, this is not a kid's show. So yeah, I think that'll about do it for this video. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy The Midnight Gospel, or is it not your cup of tea? Do you like the animation style, or do you find it off-putting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like, and subscribe if you want to see more videos similar to this. It would help out a lot and I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all later.